The Volkswagen litigation really centers on an investigation that was done in conjunction with the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, and West Virginia University. And essentially what they did is they tested Volkswagen's clean diesel motors and discovered that the purported efficiencies that they were saying they had attained for gas mileage as well as for pollutants were false. All the motors were actually built with something called a defeat device, which basically means there's a computer in the car that can tell when it's being tested and when it's being driven on the road. And when it's being tested, it changes how the motor works so that it actually produces very clean air. Whereas when it's actually being driven on the road, it's still polluting. Now, this came to everyone's attention about August of last year. And since then, there's been a groundswell of litigation. There's been lawsuits filed against Volkswagen by the Department of Justice, as well as foreign countries, as well as by our firm. We represent people who have purchased these vehicles with clean diesel motors, and they did not get what they wanted. They did not get a motor that actually had a clean diesel motor. And more importantly, their car is now worth significantly less than what they purchased or leased it for. So this litigation is about trying to make sure that Volkswagen is held accountable for engaging in what is probably one of the largest consumer frauds in the history of the United States. You know, we've been talking to a lot of people who have been calling in and saying, what should I do? What's the best way moving forward? And the first question they ask is, well, why do we need a lawyer? Maybe we should wait until we see what Volkswagen does. And some people have simply said, well, I've gotten this apology letter from Volkswagen. Is that not enough? Well, my first thing to say is it's always better to have a legal representative. And the simple fact is if you wait and see what Volkswagen does, and we're not proactive about actually prosecuting this case, there are certain legal defenses that could emerge that could actually prevent you later on down the line from being able to pursue a cause of action against Volkswagen. Lawyers make sure you get the best possible resolution in your case. And that's literally what I do for a living. I'm out there on the front lines fighting to make sure that my clients' interests are fully vindicated. Waiting and seeing what Volkswagen is going to do is not a really good approach for dealing with a potentially valuable product like your car. Second, and I think people forget this, is that when you go on your own, there's a lot of paperwork, there's a lot of things you need to keep track of. Legal issues might emerge that you didn't even realize could happen. And when you hire an attorney, we take on that burden. We make sure that everything is done correctly. We make sure everything is processed appropriately. And we make sure that you get the best possible resolution, one that you might not be able to attain on your own. And finally, and this is sort of a recent development, is there's been a multi-district litigation that's been created in San Francisco, where many, many people who have filed claims are now consolidating their claims before a single judge. Now, the process is still being worked out, but if you have an attorney, you can actually help leverage what's happening in that multi-district litigation to make sure that your case gets the best possible result. Another question that we frequently get is, should I do an individual claim or should I just do a class action? And to really answer that question, you have to understand what the difference is between the two types of lawsuits. When you file an individual claim, you're not attempting to represent anybody. You're just representing your own interests, and your resolution simply applies to your individual claim. When you do a class action, there's one individual who's seeking to represent all people who have been injured. Now, if a class action resolves, typically there's a process whereby people who are part of the class can decide whether or not they like the resolution or they don't. They can opt into it or they can opt out. And if you opt into it, then you get whatever the settlement value is for that class action settlement. If you opt out of it, then you can then pursue your own individual claims. Typically, and not always, but pursuing an individual claim can in fact lead to a better result. But sometimes a class action can also lead to a very fair result as well. The real answer to the question is get an attorney, see what happens with the class action, and if you don't like it, then you now have a lawyer who can help you go pursue an individual claim. So they're not really mutually exclusive.